Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Circular Economy Hub's Lunchtime webinar series. I'm Zaneta Muranko. I am a Circular Economy Impact Fellow here at the Circular Economy Hub at the University of Exeter. And my background is in design engineering and behavioral science and circular economy. And I will be chairing this session. So it's really great to see our network joining this session. And for those of you who are here for the first time, the Circular Economy Hub is part of a wider national interdisciplinary circular economy research program founded by UKRI. And for more information about the program, please visit our website shown on this slide. Next one, please, Emily. Super, thank you. So before we begin, we would like to address or would like you all to be aware of a few housekeeping rules as follows. And this webinar is recorded and will be available via the C-Hub's website. If you do not wish to be included in the recording, please keep your cameras off. Please keep your microphones on mute while the speakers are presenting. And if you have any questions that you would like to ask our speakers, please post them in the chat box throughout the session. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. And finally, we would like to ask you to complete a short anonymous survey following this webinar. It is really important for us to know your feedback so that we can ensure that these events are relevant and useful to you. And so Emily, my colleague in the C-Hub, will post the link to it in the chat box towards the end of the session. Next slide, please. Super. So the topic of this webinar is circular economy and citizens. And we will be discussing overall how citizens can engage with the circular economy. What roles do we have as consumers in the circular economy? And how, in other hand, industry and governments can engage with citizens to motivate and enable them to adopt the circular economy. So moving on. Apologies, Emily. We have three speakers joining us here today, starting with Neha Rao. Neha is a sustainable textile designer and a sector specialist at RAP. She has vast international field experience in manufacturing, innovation, and business development. At RAP, she worked on the delivery of Textile 2030 project. She would talk to us more about. We also have Catriona Tassell. Catriona is a PhD candidate based at the Dyson School of Design Engineering at Imperial College London. Kat's research seeks to understand the barriers and enablers to circular consumer behavior. And her most recent research have focused on reuse of fast-moving consumer goods. And we also have in the room here Dr. Bruna Petreca. Bruna is a research fellow in human experience and materials at the Materials Science Research Center at RCA. She is a design researcher and practitioner with her work focusing on developing a deeper understanding of experience of materials in both physical and digital environments. Bruna's work in the Textile Circularity Center, that is also part of the NICE program, focuses on textiles and the multisensory aspects of experience. So each speaker will have 5 minutes to present to us their slides, followed by audience question chaired by me. So the speakers will now deliver the set of presentation in sequence, after which move on to the discussion. We will start with Neha.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm here to present an interesting piece of work by RAP. So let me start by introducing who we are. So we are a global NGO working to solve climate crisis by changing the way things are produced, consumed, and disposed of. We work with food, water, plastic, and textiles. And I'm here to represent the Textile 2030, which is a voluntary agreement under the RAP initiative. So Textile 2030 is an ambitious 10-year agreement bringing together different stakeholders to make rapid science-based progress towards climate action and deliver the UK-wide roadmap for circularity. So moving on. So the Citizen Insight Report, why did we do this study? It was to understand the current consumer trends and how we influence them towards circular business models. We first carried out this study back in 2013, and it is backed by popular mandate in 2021. So the report is split into two parts. The first part talks about the life expectancy of different items of clothing in UK. The survey included 6,000 participants, and we audited about 45,000 garments by product category and by the variety of end use. It was one of the largest audit RAP has commissioned. Yes. So the study focused on the predicted longevity of clothing by product category, how longevity is linked to purchasing behavior, acquisition routes, retail type, price point, how longevity is linked to garment use, the type of end life, frequency of use, and has it ever been repaired. We also analyzed the wash frequency by product category, and finally, the failure modes. We questioned why garments have not been worn in the past 12 months. And fun fact, 26% of our wardrobe currently is unused. So that's about 31 clothing. So yes, it's time to dig those gems out. So did you know 45% of the UK citizens purchase, 45% of the UK citizens purchase monthly, which is an average spend of about £46. If you open our closets, an average of clothing you would own would be about 118. So let's peep into a typical UK household. I'm going to share a short story. The two protagonists are Grandma Sarah and granddaughter Rachel. They live under the same roof, but have very different habits and behavior. So granddaughter Rachel is about 20. She's a Gen Z. She has access to about £40,000 an annum. She does have a higher frequency of purchase. She does believe in having a unique style and identities. She would be someone who would opt for secondhand clothing and vintage clothing, but however, she is messy. She would look for options of repair. And coming to Grandma Sarah, she is a baby boomer. She would be about 65. She has access to about £20,000 an annum, low frequency of purchase. And the research did link that the lower the income, the lower the purchase. She would buy what she likes, but she does have apprehension to buy secondhand. So she would prefer to buy new. She is, however, well organized and would put that extra effort to maintain and repair clothes. Moving on. The second part of the research, we looked at circular business models. Now, this word has been spoken a lot, so let me define it a bit. So this circular business models keep product material in use by design for as long as possible to get the maximum value out of them. So this report looked at different principles like rental, pre-loved, subscription, repair, upcycle. So here we spoke to about 2,100 participants who purchased clothing for themselves in the last year based on age, gender, and region. And some of the insights were that we tried to look at the citizen recognition and receptivity towards a circular business model through the lens of age, average clothing spends, retail type, price point. We also looked at the receptivity of the garment type and occasion, and also the impact of new purchases. So fun fact that the longevity of clothing from 2013, which was about 3 years and 1 month, has now increased to 4 years and 3 years, which is great news. And for more such insights, you can log on to our website. Our report is up live. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Neha. We will now move on to Kat's presentation.
Hey, thanks so much. So I'm Kat. I'm a final year PhD student at the Dyson School of Design Engineering at Imperial College. And my PhD is an industrial case studentship. So it's part funded by a research council, engineering and physical sciences, and part funded by Procter & Gamble, who are a big multinational, fast-moving consumer goods company. And they own brands like Gillette, Pampers, Head & Shoulders, Ariel. So I work closely with them to kind of share and apply the research as it unfolds. I'm looking at circular consumer behaviour for FMCGs and focusing particularly on the strategy of reuse. So I'll unpick a bit what it means and then give you a high-level understanding of the kinds of research I do and insights that I generate. So first up, I just wanted to contextualise FMCGs in the broader market. They're low price and short life items from categories like household care, personal oral care, grooming, baby care, food and beverages. Other factors that define, for some reason, some of the stuff's not coming up on this slide, but other factors that define FMCGs include the level of convenience. So they're widely available in local shops. They're also known as consumer packaged goods. So there's this emphasis on the packaging. It's often single use. It gets disposed of in landfill, sometimes recycled. And these products tend to satisfy immediate needs. So hunger, thirst, which tap into often habitual, fast, subconscious patterns of behavior. As you can see on the graph, there are other categories that are closely linked to FMCGs: toys, lights, batteries, clothing and accessories, alongside what we traditionally consider in this category. And these are sometimes now even included in the FMCG conversation. So what's being done to try and combat the overconsumption and disposal and waste associated with this category? The circular economy model proposes that materials don't need to be extracted raw for production. They don't need to leave the system at the end of use or life, but can continue circulating. Some of you are probably familiar with this diagram, Ellen MacArthur butterfly diagram, but it shows it well. So each loop represents a strategy where the inner loops are most efficient, like reuse or prolonging life, and the outer least efficient, but still better than disposal. So recycling obviously requires more processing. And many of these strategies really rely on consumer behaviour, as they tend to be the stakeholder who owns and controls resources at the end of life. And obviously these are shown as individual loops in the butterfly model, but I've shown on the right that even when looking at reuse, I also need to consider preparation for reuse and recycling, as these actually sit at different stages of a consumer journey, and a reusable product will eventually reach end of life. A reduction, one of the best strategies, can also be applied to all stages of a journey, so that needs to be considered too. What does the FMCG reuse landscape look like? The Ellen MacArthur Foundation again puts forward 4 models. So these are refill at home, refill on the go, return from home, return on the go. And we can see an increasing number of products arriving on the market that fit all of these models. So here I'm showing some of the products I've carried out consumer research into, and they predominantly sit in the refill at home space. And I've selected that because it seems to be easiest to apply across FMCGs, most familiar with consumers in terms of how they purchase and use them, but also very open to misuse, given that consumers have most control over these products in comparison to other models where providers retain some sense of ownership. And whilst research often focuses on how to get consumers to transition to these categories or on what they're expected to do, I wanted to find out how consumers really behave once they've made the transition. So I found many unintended consequences that actually increase the potential impact of reuse in this process. So here are just some examples. Maybe we can all relate to these. I know I can. So many consumers own multiple reusable products, or they replace them before the design intends. Others abandon reuse for single use or continue to use disposables in addition to reusables. At the end of life, it's super common for components of a reuse offering to go to the wrong waste stream, so recyclables to landfill, non-recyclables to recycling, causing contamination. And how do we address this? How do we make reuse better and ensure that it actually reduces impact in the most effective way? By understanding, again, not all images there, but by understanding why unintended behaviours occur, so ensuring effective interventions are used to address them. So here are some of the factors that we found to influence reuse behaviours. The inner blue bubbles show some internal factors, so social norms, personality, individual differences like age, occupation, sensations relating to the product experiences, attitudes and beliefs, including environmental commitment and our perception of ability or effort. The next layer then represents external factors in the environment like availability, access to infrastructure, context of use, and then interventions are shown in purple. And once we have an understanding of the specific causes for a particular behaviour, we can use those to really target into the specific factors that are responsible. And then finally, eventually, the aim is to translate some of this emerging research into tools that help designers to engage with circular consumer behaviour. So helping them to determine which strategies, circular strategies to employ, how to engage with behaviours that support these strategies across the journey, understand which factors influence those kind of divergent or unintended behaviours that I mentioned, and deploy interventions of the right type in the right place at the right time that consider all components in a system. So here are some examples of consumer journey mapping and resource flow mapping tools on the left that my previous colleagues worked on, Zaneta included. They're specific to the FMCG space. On the right, some intervention frameworks and hierarchy tools also for inspiration. That's me. Thanks so much. Looking forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Kat. Apologies that some of the parts of your presentation didn't come up in this session.
No, it's fine.
We will now move on to Bruna.
Okay, thank you very much for having me and for the invitation, Zaneta and Emily. So I'm here representing the Textiles Circularity Center today. I co-lead the consumer experience trend in the center, and I'll talk to you a bit about actually an exhibition and some activities that are ongoing at the moment. So I'm actually at the space and you might hear some background noise. Apologies for this, but we're running studies at the moment. So just to give a bit of context, unfortunately, we are dealing with one of the most complex areas in terms of overconsumption, which is fashion and textiles. And so the reason to really start to look at this are the main challenges that we have, which are both this paradigm of overproduction, overconsumption, and disposal that we're dealing with in fashion, where we see a general detachment from garments and people just disposing very quickly of textile products and materials. And on top of that, we know from current research, there's a white paper from colleagues from Exeter at the Global Systems Institute that tell us that it takes over 20 years for sustainable technology innovations to be adopted, and that it could take 1 generation or more for a socio-technical paradigm shift. So even though we see an increase in demand and interest for sustainable materials and products, as well as practices, there is an intention and action gap that is very highlighted in fashion. So we need to support consumers to become more engaged in a circular economy and ultimately to reduce consumption. So that's why in the Textile Circularity Center, we're giving a big emphasis in the human aspects. And to address these challenges, we formed a very interdisciplinary team that works with human-centered approaches coming from social sciences, human-computer interaction, psychology, neuroscience, and design. So a big part of our approach is to get under people's skin, to understand their motivations, aspirations, fears, and so on. And to do so, we're taking a deep dive into the study of human well-being. We're putting forward a framework of well-being that maps the relations and integration processes between multiple individual, socioeconomic, and environmental dimensions of well-being, and with a special emphasis on the human value and social practices of dress. So how do we apply this knowledge? We're creating opportunities to interface with textiles development by creating some feedback loop between how people experience materials and how this can come into production, so that we hopefully create materials that people are more inclined to keep for longer or love more. We're also working with designers and design brands to reimagine participation in the co-creation of products. And finally, we're bringing new technology to create opportunities to unlock circularity and really show the values that go behind the production and creation of these new materials and garments, and really immerse people in textile circularity. So here in the Regenerative Fashion Hub, which is where I am today, is the first time that we're putting our research into the public space. So we're inviting people for conversations and to also just experience a little bit of the outcomes of our research. So it's a mix of exhibition and experience space, or experiment as well. And in terms of the consumer experience research, we have two main activities that are packaged under one concept that we created, which is the configurator, what we called it. So with the configurator, we are exploring two particular aspects of our well-being framework, which are the participation on the making or design of garments, but also a bit deeper understanding of textiles and garments. And we are observing how these two activities can contribute to attachment to clothes and connection to others. So the main activities in this configurator, oops, I think I pressed this, are the materials gym. So in the materials gym, we invite people to explore textiles. We run them through a workout session where they can work out the properties of textiles, but also their preferences, how they get affected by textiles. And we are going to use these insights to design technology that help people to reflect on the interaction with materials, slow down the process of consumption, and get a bit deeper understanding and hopefully deeper connection with materials, feeling more agent that they can access this knowledge and make more informed choices. And then we have the shirt builder, where people bring a material selection and start to reflect on the shape and fit of design. But really what we're doing here is trying to encourage people to reflect on one of the circular design strategies, which is modularity, but thinking how any or several circular design strategies can help people to contribute to clothes longevity and also to reduce consumption. So we have conversations with people to tap into this more deeply. So here you can see a little bit of some videos that we show in our installation so people can understand how these garments are assembled and disassembled, and they play with the garment while we have a study around it. And finally, as part of the whole material flow journey, which is what we prototyped here in the space, we also gather insights from how people make meaning out of this being more in contact with the flow or the life cycle of the material from waste into garments and back into regeneration. At the end of the journey, we invite people to reflect on the different roles that they might take on a circular economy. And we just give them with a patch that they can take away to have a memory of the exhibition, but also to join the Textile Circularity Center community. So I just want to thank the Consumer Experience Research Trend team and also the designers that helped us to bring this vision to life. And with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much all for your presentations. So we will now move on to the Q&A section. And we already have one question that has come through in the chat box. I'm going to read it out and I'll put it to all of you on the panel. In terms of behaviors, how do you measure changes and what data do you use? Does this also link with other consumption and production data?
I'm happy to jump in and have a go at answering some of that first up. I mean, there are tons of different ways that we can measure behavior change. Obviously, ideally, we want to kind of engage with whether actual change is happening rather than kind of consumer reflection on what they're doing and whether that equates to change. I think when it comes to kind of traditional waste related stuff, the most kind of in situ way of quantifying that is through audits. So actually counting or numerically kind of trying to figure out the change in quantity of waste that's being, say, recycled versus disposed of. I think it's a little bit different when we're thinking about other types of behavior change. I think in my space in particular with FMCG, a lot of behavior change, well, there's a lot of kind of intervention testing in terms of studies of what you might intend, like I said, like what you might intend to do. But when it comes to what you actually do, I've seen behavior change tested at the point of sale. So for example, if you're trying to get people to use a reusable coffee cup more than a disposable coffee cup, you might have, again, you would kind of quantify the change in a period of time in a specific location, say at a university canteen, and base that on you could test like 3 different types of messaging technique or pricing, and figure out which has the best, which is most impactful in terms of what's consumed. I think one of the problems I see in some of this stuff at only testing at the point of consumption, though, is, as you saw some of my intended consequences showing, people are actually still over consuming even the reusable. So it doesn't necessarily take into account the bigger picture with that kind of stuff. It's just like in the moment, are they buying or using the reusable over the disposable at that point in time? So I think what we really could do more of is think about long-term studies and change, and where how we can kind of measure that, which is something I think still quite a big missing gap.
Neha or Bruna, would you like to take this question also?
Yeah, sure. I'll go next. So I think surveys have been one of the methods that RAP has adopted. Let me answer this question in 2 parts. So one would be surveys, frequent check-ins, because we do have access to different stakeholders, at least from the supply chain point of view in the clothing industry, making sure that data does compare not only year on year, and behavior does change year on year due to a lot of different factors, but also comparing data from manufacturer to recyclers, because from the start to the end, to just give you an example, the amount of polyester that was manufactured in the year compared to what we do get in the recycling, the data was completely different. Also because a lot of polyester goes into the workwear, which doesn't get accounted. So very rightly pointed out that we need to have different checkpoints as to audit and compare that data does match. So yeah.
Thank you, Neha. How do you measure behavior in your work, Bruna, or behavior change?
Yes, so at the moment, we're not running any long-term studies. Like, I think this is a really great suggestion, but we need to start at the point where we have the main contact with participants now. So for example, in the case of this, we're testing now the strategy of modularity. So for us, it's important to think about, will people even bother participating on this? So one study that we're conducting at the moment is with UCL Psychology and Neuroscience Department. We're looking at efforts because we know that people really consider a lot of things when they have to put more effort into something. And we don't know the answers yet, but what we're doing at the moment is try to understand a bit more how is the relationship between more effort and added value in the final product. There have been studies in similar ways that worked, for example, with IKEA, the called IKEA effect, where they assess similar kind of relationship and this balance that is necessary, because this can influence hugely in change of behavior, and is something that we can assess independently of looking so much long term. So that's how we are approaching this at the moment.
Thank you. I have a question. So when we think of circular economy, there are many humans involved in that system, right? Many actors. And this session is about consumers specifically. And so I wonder why and how important is the consumer behavior in us transitioning towards circular economy? Please go ahead, anyone in the panel.
I mean, I think for me, I mean, obviously, like, I don't deny that every actor is pretty essential. Like, a circular economy is a systems change, and that requires a complete overhaul of everything and everyone operating within it. So I think, and there is often, I think, overemphasis on responsibility of the consumer, who actually really struggles to understand how to be responsible, or even to, to understand, what it is they need to do. So I guess actually other stakeholders are really integral to influencing that understanding, to educating consumers also. But that said, so I mentioned in my presentation that for a lot of my products, consumers, depending on the model that you're using, circular model, consumers tend to be the one who are in that critical point of control at the end of life or end of use. So really, they do have a lot of power. They hold a lot of power in kind of where that resource or material goes next. So I think in that sense, consumers are pretty critical and important because they close the loop. They are the circular kind of enactor at that point in time. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go next. I mean, I do believe that being conscious, being aware, is a luxury, and which some people might not have, you know, to really understand, take that time out, question, ask for transparency. I think, I mean, as manufacturers, it is the responsibility somewhere, because we, like, as manufacturers, you understand the system. However, yes, change does drive from consumers, because it is what they want, what the current, you know, situation is in the market, what the demand is, that does drive. But I would say it is the responsibility of both, and it's a give and take. The goal is that it's not only environmental, it's a lot to do with social. It's also the idea that, you know, we want to keep businesses sustainable. But yes, little effort, but high impact. And how do we create that with citizens being the center of it?
Yeah, I can also chip in. So I think one of the hypotheses that we have is that we can make participating on circularity a bit more intuitive, not to overburden consumers, hitting them with a book of rules, or require them that suddenly to understand transparency of branding. Suddenly they can like be faced with so much complexity. As both colleagues already said, it's a systemic change. So if we suddenly require that kind of knowledge, is a lot. So how can, for example, we rethink design of products so that they are making some of those behaviors, circular behaviors, more intuitive? So yeah, this is something we are exploring, as this idea of seeing products as a platform, and they would facilitate from one side the introduction of this new generation of materials that are more circular, but also at the same time already creates the opportunity for new cultures to emerge, where people will be encouraged to extend the life of products and also loop them back in. So I think design has the potential to really contribute here in synthesizing a lot of this knowledge that is so complex, intangible things that can effectively bring people to action, like really trying to close that gap that I was saying in the presentation between the intention, because intention is there. If we see the research, people are saying, I want to be more sustainable. But from the other side, we know that there is research on, for example, the anxiety that people are feeling because they don't really know how to act. So it's a lot of tips that people are giving to us that we need to use design to help them to be agents in this circularity.
Thank you. We have an interesting comment from a participant in the chat box from June, and this is around terminology. And so there is a lot of discussion between us whether we should call consumers users or stewards or guardians. And I wonder what's your take on it, because I wonder whether with every consumption activity or used activity, or even stewardship activity, there is element of consumption associated with it, such as wear and tear and so on. So I wonder whether this is kind of my take on consumption, that it can be extensive, but it also can mean, you know, surface tear and so on. But without kind of focusing what I'm trying to communicate, I would like to put it to the panel. What do you think about the definition of consumer in the circular economy?
Can I start on that one? So that last station that I was showing in my presentation, we are working with the UCL Social Sciences, and we've been actually trying to get from consumers their voice, and in this respect, who do they want to be? So this is what we, in the end of the journey, when we show them like this flow of the textiles, we get into a conversation with them, and we created some a bit more funky roles to get people more excited to discuss this. But for example, creative consumption cutter or marvelous mender, these are some of the roles that we present to them. But with that, we just really like are bringing people to think even consumer seems like just such a one role thing. And in fact, in a circular economy, we might be playing even multiple roles depending on the time and the interaction. So we thought that, okay, there's a lot of readings about this, even in fashion, there has been so much of a discussion in terms of how passive, in fashion, we call fashion victims or the fashion slaves. There are even worse terminologies. But it's all very coming from academics approaching this and trying to make sense. So we really thought, what about asking people who they want to be? Who are you in the circular economy? So this is how we are trying to, so I don't have a definite answer, but more like an openness to including people in creating these new terminologies.
Yeah, I'd like to go next. So we actually chose to call it citizen and not consumer for us because like we didn't want it just to be an intervention after the product is made, but an insight that has to be incorporated from when the material is getting produced, why are we picking? So that's why I think we wanted to give that importance to citizens and not consumers. So yeah, we went with citizens.
Yeah, I also some interesting thoughts coming from that, but I think thinking about the word consumption, consumer, consume, all of it really fundamental. It literally means to use up or to purchase, and that's kind of what we're trying to avoid. So the actual meaning of the word doesn't really have value in a circular economy necessarily. But I think you're right, Bruna, in that we kind of academicize, whatever the word is, all of this kind of terminology, and often it just sits in at a level of kind of journal papers and conferences and doesn't really translate to what a consumer really feels that they are or what they're doing. So I think it's quite important to include them in the process and to understand how they perceive their role in this new system, and how we can then create new terminology that supports that. Because I think also some of these potential terms can, again, place a lot of responsibility on a consumer and come across as quite kind of serious and intense for what they then need to do. I think there's potential in, obviously we already have the term recycle and people are very familiar with that, this kind of recycle. And there's been conversation around whether we can kind of include that like a reuser. Is someone a reuser? They're not a user or a consumer. So I think there's kind of potential to integrate that kind of already familiar kind of add-on language as well. But yeah, I mean, I do think we need to acknowledge their different role though, and move away from those kind of the association that we have, the associations we have with consumption and overconsumption and all of these things.
Thank you. Another participant, Ryan, he read a description of a consumer as a doer. Ultimately, we have to put certain element of effort and work into the system. So that's a great description. But I also wonder, and perhaps it's a discussion we could expand on aside of this webinar, but it's just a thought that when it comes to circular economy, it's about interaction with resources. And my point is that consumer in the kind of traditional definition doesn't fit. Nonetheless, in our interaction with resources, there is an element of wear and tear or you kind of use. So I feel that perhaps consumption to extent fits, but maybe in a different definition. Nonetheless, I understand the perspective on users, doers, and all of those different roles we have. Another work we do, there is a work that we do on behavior in circular economy in the University of Exeter that looks at consumption work, which is looking closely at the effort and the roles that we have as consumers in the new system. Nonetheless, when we look at the linear system, there is a huge element of work involved in us participating in it also. So it's just a reflection that perhaps moving to circular economy doesn't have to be so different. And maybe that follows to another question to the panel. How different are the behaviors from the ones that we are performing now in the circular economy? Does the change have to be significant for some of the models that you're exploring, or can it be kind of light touch? What can we do by system design to facilitate consumers to participate in circular economy in a more gentle way, aligning with their routines? So that's the question to the panel.
Yeah, can I begin? Yes. So, I mean, in terms of textiles and fashion, really, the reality is that people love buying clothing. It is that satisfaction and excitement that people are looking for. So I think when we say that the environmental motivation may not necessarily translate into the change in citizen behavior. So I think the idea is that we make it exciting, we make it easy. This identified behavior insight needs to be adapted to the circular business model. And yeah, a lot of consumer insights do get affected by external factors. So when we say that, 54% of the UK is happy to purchase secondhand, one additional current situation is that, cost of living prices are increasing. So will that facilitate secondhand clothing? Will that, drive repair? So I think the idea is that how it is a lot to do with how citizens identify themselves in the situation, and how business identify the overall, study of how things are going, and then how both of these things can plug in and there can be a marriage and there's a better impact at the end of it. So.
Can I also come to this? I think that's why we say that having a deep dive into human well-being is so important, because yes, people love buying, but what is it that buying is doing to them? What kind? It is a lot of newness, immediateness of the satisfaction. Simply, it can be also sense of belonging. It can be because body shape is an issue, and I want to try to change that through garments. Like, there are several reasons. So we need to understand a little bit more of this motivation so that we can bring this into informing design and making perhaps how can we bring, for example, newness as an example. Newness doesn't need to be always with a new product. It could be different through services or through sharing economy. So it's always like, how can we turn this on its head through understanding what are people's motivations to use this as design information. I think what we really need is to open up this as how do we translate reverse engineering humans to use this as a specification for design, basically.
Yeah, and just so you mentioned you were kind of talking about, do consumers really need to do more to participate, or to what extent does their behavior change in these new systems, Zaneta? And I think what I mentioned is that with different models, this is kind of has varying degrees of change and effort. I think with refill at home, which is what I particularly look at for FMCGs, it actually has quite a similar pattern. Obviously, yes, okay, consumers have to actively do the refill and carry out that's the new step, but everything else, like the sense of ownership, like the product still belongs to you, the way that it's purchased in store, online, is still very familiar. So all of those steps are actually reflect very much a process that we're already familiar with, and actually what some of the insights I've come across are that consumers don't actually struggle with the refill part, the actual carrying out the refill. They're not actually really bothered by that. In fact, most people that I speak to or interview they kind of like go over it very quickly, and it's not really a pain point or a barrier, but it's one that we often think might be when we're designing things, and we kind of expect it to be the worst part, to expect them to have to do that. But actually it comes more down to things like the experience with the actual with the actual product itself, like, is a natural ingredients not working as well for me? Okay, well, I'm going to stop using that refill and go back to this other thing that that I kind of understand the experience of more. I think also following up to Neha is that when you're kind of talking about the purchase of secondhand clothing, I think again with that, you know, you need to change the perception of that and the trend and the kind of intention to do that, but actually it's the same kind of, you know, process of going and buying something, as long as it's available and accessible to us. Like the level of behavior change and shift is actually pretty minimal. So it really is about accessibility of some of this stuff in terms of how far we have to go to get it, those kind of factors.
Thank you. There are some really interesting questions in the chat box, and one is, that's from Hugo. Hugo, please speak up if I misinterpret. But I think this is about consumer blame, and I think this is about how we focus on consumer too much, but in fact, we need to transition to a norm where we facilitate them to adopt circular economy at scale, so that there is the norm, meaning the business model across is uniform and it's circular. Well, that's a big challenge at an industry level. But there is a general question: do you think that this is what needs to happen in order for consumers to adopt circular economy? And I wonder, Hugo, is this what you meant? I think it's a yes. So what do you guys think on the panel?
I mean, yeah, I do think that it is, it's something we need to scale up and fast, definitely. I think the issue is that when you have circular models within the wider context of continued single use and disposability, which is what currently exists, like, it's impossible for consumers to make these choices. And it's a kind of like a very often irrational process that we buy things on the spot. So unless all of those models are circular, we're going to be tempted back very likely to the disposable single-use practices that we're still more familiar with. Yeah, I think, I guess in order to get that speed and scale, really, I think it still comes down to this age-old question of policy and government and legal requirements around that, because otherwise the temptation is too great for companies to continue implementing product or kind of designing and selling products that the current kind of profit and economic model is based on. So it's kind of, I think it's a process of disincentivizing also the continued kind of the continued rollout of disposable stuff. Yeah, I think that answers some of the question, maybe.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think behavior change is a process. It's not a target, really. So I think, yes, the speed is required, the scale is required. We know where our reality right now, but also from the business perspective, right? Like, it's for brands to understand the unit economics. So if a brand does sell the same garment twice, he's going to earn more compared to selling one product. So I think that change will help business manage themselves as well as, just resource management as a whole. Citizens, yes, I think having those small interventions of where, information is clearer, is more consistent. It's even having that small question where when you go to the website and you're purchasing, having new and resale side by side. I think those small design inputs will definitely make a behavioral change as an overall impact. So, yeah.
Bruna, you disappeared. I might move on to the next question. I see in the, and we then allow Bruna to answer another question. I see that there are really interesting comments, and one is from the participant who said, who shared their personal insights on them trying to join the water filter and Gillette blades recovery scheme, but the contracted recyclers took so far 3 months to supply the recovery packs. before they took matters in their own hands, putting their own gloves on and dismantling the stuff themselves. And there is a comment that they imagined that not many consumers would be doing it. So there was one about enabling, and there was another one about, it's a really interesting one, how is it possible to generate the same level of dopamine? I assume a good experience from reuse and recycling. So what we are talking about here are two things: enabling and also motivating. And I wonder, in your work, what do you think businesses and governments can do to motivate and enable consumer behavior? It would be great to know a little bit more about this from the context of your work.
Okay, yeah, I can jump in first. I think I'm particularly familiar. I'm familiar with, for example, the razor blade collection scheme. So I'm going to come in response to that. I think initially, it's a very valid and true point. I think that often these kind of schemes are spoken about and displayed on websites and used as a kind of way of stating that they're doing more, and then actually in reality they're not really operating yet, or definitely not efficiently. And I think to bring in some of these schemes requires huge logistical shifts and changes that actually aren't in place. Not at scale anyway, when they initially introduced them. So another example is like things like bioplastic, supposedly biodegradable, but single-use cups and stuff that they don't actually, the infrastructure isn't actually there yet. So people buy them and then they can't actually process them. I mean, when it comes to the blade system, I think it's great, yeah, that you're going through the process of taking it apart in order to recycle it. I think it's probably unlikely that most consumers are going to carry out that process. I think you have to be very aware. Yeah, I can see that you're showing the nice the process that you've gone through to do that. Yeah, I think essentially it's a problem with introducing schemes a bit too early, and obviously it's in a way they're being introduced to try and get a perspective of interest, and whether it's worth rolling them out at a bigger level. But I think on the other hand, like if consumers try and get involved, then they probably will be disincentivized to kind of try again, or kind of keep track of it when it has actually reached capacity to work.
Yeah, coming from the point of can we bring excitement back into resale and repair, I think it's also about those small wins, finding that amazing garment in a charity shop at an amazing rate does get your dopamine level high. I've been a victim to that. So I think it is about normalizing, having that conversation. I mean, I come from India where secondhand clothing is still very much prevalent. Like siblings keep taking clothing from each other, and there's a lot of exchange. But at the same time, currently, when I do talk to my friends, and in a normal conversation, when you go like, hey, this is secondhand, there is a certain notion that, oh, this could be dirty, this is used by somebody. So I think that psychological shift is one of the main reasons why CBM models do not get applied to citizens. So I think normalizing that, truly having a conversation about it, social media is a great way to just get that information out there. So I think there's a lot of different channels that we might have to look into to really make it cool and more adaptable.
Can I add to it that both words, enabling and motivating, have a lot to do with education. And when people have knowledge, something that is very good is that they can feel agency, or they can feel self-efficacy, that if they're putting that knowledge to use, all of those things are known to generate well-being. So how can we, like, even rethinking education, give back people or reskilling people to be able to repair, or reskilling people to know materials in garments? Like, it is a problem in recycling that if labels fall off the clothes, people don't know how to recognize materials anymore. So there are lots of holes that we can start to fill to make the gap again smaller between people's intention and the action. So my chipping here would be education. I think government could do a lot, like materials education was part of British education. UK education is not anymore. So is it maybe something to reconsider? So yeah, I think that's what I want to bring up here.
Can I jump in super quick and just add something on the dopamine conversation and the kind of feel good stuff? I've actually seen studies recently that find that even if we think about buying something, which is pretty crazy, but like, you know, you pick it up in the shop and you get you already get the level of kind of feel good from that, and then you put it back and it's enough to satisfy that need. So we don't actually, I guess that proves we don't need to actually buy it in order to get that feedback or response. And that there are other feel-good things associated with more sustainable behaviours like recycling as well, that have been found to exist. So I think we can tap into those at end of life as well as at purchase.
Thank you. Really interesting insights. There was just disappeared. Oh, it's back. A comment from another participant about what's your view on the relationship between circular economy and citizens, and whether this is a question of availability, price, and public education, especially for biodegradable polymers and textiles. So we touched on that. We touched on education and availability. Well, I wonder what's your view on the direction of change. So we know that in order to perform any behavior, first and foremost, we have to be able to do it. So we need to know that we're able to do it also. So there is a notion of perceived ability and actual ability in the context of being able to perform a behavior. So sometimes the fact that there is a refill around the corner doesn't mean that I perceive that there is and that I am able to do it. So that there is an element of communication associated there, but also the ability. And this is where we talked about normalizing certain circular economy models to be able to perform these behaviors in the first place. And there is a question of price. And I wonder whether in the transition to circular economy, looking at price, whether circular economy is for everyone and whether everyone can afford it. What is your view on that? And whether that hinders or motivates certain behaviors? But I would also caveat that that there is in circular economy and in those different reuse models or recovery models, there is circular economy is for everyone, and we can play to everyone's values, right? So, but yeah, I'm interested to know more about from your work on the price element.
I think sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for us is a little bit early to say, because we're working not at scale with the materials. We will be working in creating models to understand the cost. So Phil Purnell from Leeds is working with us and leading on that. But the only thing I have to say is in regards to fashion, we know that the cheap clothes that we buy are not having their true cost, and then again, it's just going back to the old discussion of what's the environmental cost, where is the human labor cost, and what is the cost that you're paying in that garment, what is the cost that we are talking about. So I think this is first thing to really be more explicit and transparent about.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to add that just because we see £5 or £2 on a t-shirt, and it's a very immediate effect that we have that, oh, we bought something that's cheap. In the long run, the number of t-shirts that we might run through in, say, a year or more, your total cost of spend is definitely going to be much higher compared to, say, you renting it or you reusing it, buying it from a charity shop. So I think we don't see it holistically, and we see it as one price per product. I think that has changed. We have done financial modeling with certain inputs from brands as well, as to how maybe we enable brands adopt the model, because I mean, they need to see that, the buck is still increasing while they're doing the good for the environment. It's an unfortunate truth. So I think it is, yeah, like zooming out and maybe giving a very holistic scope to the consumer, that it's not just the environmental benefit, but cost being one of the biggest barriers in like anything, any CBM that we have tried to study. I think giving that holistic viewpoint will definitely help citizens make a better choice at the end. Yeah.
For me, I think especially for the products I look at, they're on the very cheap end of the spectrum. Obviously fashion is starting to also reflect that as well, but it is difficult when the pricing is so much more for some of these better options. I mean, I don't actually think that circular economy models or that more sustainable stuff necessarily needs to be more expensive. I think often it's being inflated to kind of make it seem like a kind of more luxury or a different choice. But we are seeing more and more things come to the market that actually have very similar price points now that it's becoming more common. And I think it's also helping or assisting consumers in seeing the long-term financial gain from it as well. So sometimes the upfront cost might be more than we would like, but that actually if you are continuing to reuse something that is durable over, you know, a kind of 2-year period, that actually over that time what you would have spent on the single-use equivalent is significantly less. So it's kind of trying to facilitate the understanding and the kind of foresight in seeing that savings gain.
Thank you. We'll ask one final question and then we will wrap up. But the final question is, if each of the panel members could give us an answer on what do you think I can do as citizen to adopt circular economy now? If you give me just one top answer to that question, that'd be great.
I would just say, I mean, this isn't necessarily circular economy specific maybe, but it's more just a kind of general point, is just think before you buy, and less is more. They're kind of tagliney things to say, but I think you know, it's thinking beyond just the circularity and to try and actually reduce that like highest level of what we can aim to achieve. So instead of kind of subconsciously buying things on the spot, question whether you need it. There are also some interesting tools out there that are available, so it's worth looking into those that kind of facilitate, if you kind of don't feel like you have the skills, education or kind of technical capacity, that you can kind of get that information at your fingertips by just scanning in products now and finding out what the kind of impact of those is, without needing to go and have the kind of expertise to understand the whole supply chain and process from start to finish, that they kind of just like package that in a consumer friendly way. So look out for those.
Yeah, I think for me, one would be that just use what you have. Like, we don't need more products in our life. Every decision that we make, even from skincare to clothing to food to plastic or whatever products that are coming inside our house, I think having that inventory check is extremely important. So yeah, just using what we have and just being more wise as to, I mean, when we talk about sustainable, the first thing is that, okay, I'm going to switch it, you know, I'm just going to throw it and then bring like more sustainable products. I think that's not the ideal way to go about things. So yeah.
I think for me it would be particularly related to fashion, to think about what are the other roles that fashion has. Fashion is also about making us feel connected to others, because we are expressing ourselves, is this creative relationship with clothes. And if we can awaken that a bit more, to not necessarily just be consuming as the only thing that relates us to fashion, like there are so many other ways to be a fashionable person, and this can be connected much more with this expression of the self and creativity.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you all of you in the audience and the fantastic questions and comments you've given us. And also a warm thank you to Neha, Kat and Bruna for coming along and sharing their wisdom with us. And for all the audience, to sign up for more sessions like this, please visit Circular Economy Hub's website. There are also other topics that we cover in the context of circular economy. Please also feel free to sign up to our newsletter via the website to hear more from us about the work that we do on the program. Thank you very much. See you all soon.